Welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Brandon, and today we're going over Data Live. Starting off, I just have an overview of the deck that's going to be previewed today. Looking at 8 standby Data Live. This is really more a skeleton versus a fully formed list. Most lists are going to look very similar to something like this. Numbers are going to be off slightly. I just wanted to preview that before we get started so we know what we're looking at going forward. Kind of starting off to get some expectations underway. The idea of this 8 standby build is to build field, build the wall, keep the wall. We're also looking at being able to deny our opponents their advantages, and then from there being able to, with precision, close out the end game through a variety of techniques, whether through Icy Tail or through a rather precise combo. And ultimately finish out your opponent's game through the choices that you make to be able to close it out most effectively. Kind of first want to look at level 0 overall. These are a lot of the different tools and pieces that are going to be available to you through level 0. Most of these are pretty standard effects that allow you to be able to move throughout your deck, to be able to get pieces that you need at certain periods of time in stages of the game, cards that assist with knowledge and information. What do you get to know about your deck? Let's start off with one of the more disruptive tools in your level 0 package. Let's look at this Itsuka Shido with its Blink effect. Now, Blink is something that actually has only really come around relatively recently in English Weiss. We have 3 other characters in English Weiss that do a similar effect. We see going back to Fate, Heavensfield 1 with Caster. This one allowed you to just, all it did was on play, blink a character to memory, put it back on field. Almost a full year later, we see that again in Mob Psycho with this Reagan. So this effect has been around for a while. But why this card is so powerful is because partly the interactions within this deck and its second ability on the card itself. All of the other cards are either that is the only effect the card does, or with the example of the Reagan, you have to immediately pay out its other effect when you're playing this card on field. With this Blink card, not only can you blink as its first effect here, the secondary effect, you can pay 1 to essentially replace it in hand with another card, which is really more powerful later in the game. Level 0, having bodies on field that also blink, not too bad. But as you get later towards the game trying to blink things further down the road, you don't necessarily want to be swinging with a level 0 card. This allows you to replace it and essentially turns blink into a pay 1 effect. When you combine this with the My Little Shido card later, we'll look at that in a little bit when we look at My Little Shido, but the fact that you can do as much damage as you can with this Blink Shido Itsuka is very, very impressive because it removes cross-turn effects. I think we've said that quite a bit here on the channel, but what does that actually mean? We're going to look at some of the effects that Blink removes. One of the main things it removes is this Obero combo. So this Megamine from Konosuba, the Aaron from Attack on Titan, its cross-turn effect of saying, hey, we can bounce back to hand. Congratulations. That is now removed. Looking at Priestess, level 3, and the Rider, level 3 from Fate, things that help with this Soul Wall, trying to prevent damage through those means. Congratulations. Those are cross-turn effects and now removed. Power, looking at on-field power, like for example from the Brainstormer from this set. Congratulations, that's now removed. It also removes markers. So for example, like the Rem level 3. For example, the Potion Maker from Slime. Anything that gets markers. So with all of these effects that it effectively removes, we've seen this happen before, but not on a card that is so readily able to be replaced. This allows it to essentially become a pay 1 to blink, as opposed to a full card from hand that you potentially need later in the game. So that's just for this one card. This one card can remove the effects of most of these things. Everything listed on this slide here, this blink can effectively turn off. Now, I recognize that the blink is only affecting one lane specifically. When combined with My Little Shido, or even another one, you can then begin to affect multiple lanes, and it becomes a rather big problem for a lot of these effects. Within our level 0 package, we also have the Brainstormer, which is a pay 1 tap 2 Brainstormer to search for a character on Climax Reveal. but it also comes with the ability to return back to hand on climax play, which innate standby allows it to have an open lane to standby things in, as well as when it comes back to hand, it grants power to a character in the last cross turn. Now, we just talked about how Shido can blink that away. However, since there are now only currently 4 sets in English that have blink, it's still relevant. And that additional 1,000 power can actually make the difference in some matchups. One of our main tech options in this build specifically, we have our Climax Swapper. So when you play the Climax Swapper onto field, you can reveal your hand, and if there's a Climax in there, you can then force your opponent's front row to be minus 500 power. You do have to reveal your hand for that effect. The only real time you actually need to even swap a Climax is going to be in the end game, potentially. And that's only if you don't have the right Climax there. So it's more of really an out to getting the right Climax into hand. So there's a pretty good chance that revealing your hand isn't as much of a cost, especially if you're trying to close out on that turn. But it is worthy to note, to get that minus 500 power, you do have to reveal your hand and have a Climax in it. Next up, we have our Chiori, which is when this goes to waiting room, you can discard a card to look at the top 4 and then choose one level 1 or higher. On attack, it also can grant 1k to any character on field, which is important because then it allows you to kind of, despite everything more or less having a rather low power base for this level 0 lineup, it allows you to be able to scale up to be able to compete with some beaters. Our drop Salvage, being able to pay 1, discard 1 to salvage a character from waiting room. When you do that, you then can grant 1,000 power to another character, not that one, but any other character. Again, to also kind of help with that on attack, trying to beat over a certain lane. But the other big effect with this card is, on play, you can look it up to the top 2 cards of your deck and rearrange it. Knowing the top 2 cards of your deck can help you for staging your turn, your attack order. Basically, giving you that additional information is helpful moving forward. So as you make the choices to play your game, you have that. And then last up on our level 0 lineup, we have an Arasu, which is the trial deck Toka. On play, you can reveal the top card of the deck. If it's a character, put it into hand, discard a card. As well as secondary effect, discard a card to draw 1. Both very helpful effects, a little bit of hand filter, as well as the ability to potentially draw into climaxes or events. Very, very useful, especially in an 8 standby deck where you kind of want to slam a standby about every turn. This allows you to be able to draw into it if you didn't already. Or this allows you to draw into the event My Little Shido, which, as we reach level 1, let's talk about My Little Shido for a minute. Level 1, you're really trying to continue to build the wall. You're trying to continue to build power on board. So in one way to do that, to help maintain your field presence, is to deny your opponent's field as much as possible. With My Little Shido, you have 3 main effects to choose from. All of these effects requiring you to tap a character. First effect, look at the top 4 cards, choose 1 character, and then add to hand. We like that. Secondary effect, level down. Choose a character on your opponent's field that's at least level 1 or higher. Swap it for a card that's at most 1 level below that in your opponent's waiting room. Sometimes you can get kind of funny, especially right after refresh and there's a very limited supply of cards in their waiting room. You can switch it out for something even lower. However, your opponent gets to choose the card that it's replaced with. Also can be encored back onto field. So that's one thing to keep in mind with moving forward as well, especially when you do this level down effect, that your opponent could always pay 3 to put the card back on field. However, level down is pretty powerful. Pay 3 encore is not very helpful in a long-term game plan strategy. So My Little Shido can level down things such as early plays, things that could maintain a larger field presence, or things that maybe you're too big to deal with, like great performance, being able to remove great performance targets before even beginning attack phase. You could also do this to deny level 1 combos, such as the Obero. That gets into a debate of whether or not that's useful or not. Anything level 1 higher, you can then use to exchange with a level 0 in your opponent's waiting room. Being able to deny your opponents any kind of advantage that deals with field, to be able to then play your field game moving forward. There are a couple counters to this as well. Encore is technically a counter to level down, and your opponents can try to do something cute, for example, putting a Chiori and then encoring back onto field so that way they can also do the Chiori effect for free. It's a possibility and things that your opponents can do. So keep in mind with things like that, you can't use My Little Shido to targets that are hexproofed. Things like Reinhardt. However, You can also remove things like we looked at with the Blink Shido. You can also remove things like the Soul Walls. You can also technically force that too with cards that need Encore. You can also force that on the level 3 Shizu. You can also force that on level 3 Yunyun. And you can force your opponents to try to deal with that situation, to either Encore back onto field, minusing cards from hand, or forcing them to change their game plan. And that's just with level down alone. It also has a third ability, My Little Shido does. If you have a small hand size, you can then salvage a level 3 character from Waiting Room. Typically, that's going to be more towards like your end game state, so you can play your end game and close out a game that way. Level down is the main thing that most people fear from this card, because it can work to dismantle your opponent's gameplay and game states through the cost of tapping a character, which is why we looked back at Shido Itsuka, where you can essentially pay 1 to replace that card from the top 4 cards of your deck. You can tap a character that's already going away. It did its cool main effect, Blink, play My Little Shido to then do an additional effect for the cost of tapping that character, which you then turn around and get rid of to replace for another character you could then turn around and play in that spot. It becomes a very effective combination of cards, which can be very deadly to your opponent. Trying to minimize your opponent's advantage while trying to maximize yours. One of the big things with this deck is, with all this denial tech, if you're trying to play into Data Live, you're not playing your game anymore. You are playing Data Live's game, and the more effectively you can respond to that, the better your chances are of doing well. When Data Live enters the field, it is attempting to control the game. It wants to determine what's going to be on field and what's not. It wants to hog resources. It wants to starve out its opponent from the resources that it has. And then once the opponent's starved out, it'll put its opponent out of its misery when it closes out its game. So as we look at the rest of level 1, we have our typical 1/1, 7/5 character card Encore for our 8 standby deck. Trying to get those big cards in early that you can keep around if you need to through Encore. You have a 2K backup, which you would expect in an 8 standby deck to help keep your cards on field. You also have this back row Toka, this 1/0 blue card, that allows you to be able to, on your opponent's turn, grant 1.5k to a character on field. And when your characters reverse something, you can look at the top card of your deck and either keep it on top or put it on the bottom of your deck. So you're able to look at essentially the next card and help essentially fish for climaxes for the top of your deck so that way you can cancel more often. This is a really powerful effect, especially as you progress into later stages in the game. Being able to damage Scry, starting at playing at level 1, standbying in at level 0, you have a lot of options here with this deck at that point. To start damage Scrying so you can try to cancel more often, so you can live longer, which is really benefits standby decks to having that prolonged gameplay where you can maximize your advantage. It becomes even more apparently oppressive as we get into level 2. We have this 2/2-10k that when you reverse something can look at the top 2 cards and rearrange. Combined with the back row Toka, which allows you then to damage Scry, and then you can look at the top 2 cards of your deck. You're looking at potentially 3 cards in your deck on your opponent's turn to try to pull up climaxes and be able to stall out the game there, so that way you can build as many resources as you want / need to get to the end game. At level 2, we also have our free fresh counter, which is a 2/5 counter that you can pay an additional 2 to refresh your deck. You're kind of in control of your own deck states at that point. So stalling out at level 2 here with these cards in play, really, really helpful moving forward, especially when we get to level 3, being able to play a lot of these cards down. Starting off, we have the Icy Tail Fujumi, which allows you to, on attack, pay 3, discard 1 to put the bottom 5 cards of your opponent's deck into Waiting Room, and then burn for the number of climaxes revealed in that. So a good hit against compression decks to remove climaxes from your opponent's deck, as well as to be able to stuff cards into your opponent's Waiting Room, which is really helpful for your combo here in a second. You also get to heal when you play this card onto field, and when you reverse something, you can memory kick it. If your opponent doesn't need the card on field, you can get rid of it. Looking at the level 3 combo, you have the ability to, on attack, choose one of 3 options. You can, with combo, for free stock swap, or with combo for free shuffle back 3 cards, or on combo you can discard 2 cards to burn for 3. All 3 very helpful effects that allow you to be able to either be able to manipulate your opponent's deck state or take advantage of said deck state. Now, should worthy to note that it is on standby, so you're not getting additional soul from the combo itself. But being able to deal precision damage into decks is very, very helpful and very, very lethal. Because looking at the back row assist, we have the 2K assist that on play, choose one of 3 options. So you can either salvage a character, you can either look at the top 3 cards of your deck and choose one, or you can grant 1,000 power and 1 soul to your characters. So congratulations, you didn't need a climax that gives 1k1 because your back row can give 1k1. So strong number of effects all in one that really helps to close out the game. We also have an early play healer that allows you to be able to heal. Pretty straightforward. But is especially helpful for when you're stalling out that level 2 game, that you can kind of throw in some healing here and there to be able to extend that a little bit longer. Well, variations of this deck are going to be more popularized. Choice standby also exists, and is also a very powerful thing as well. And realistically, the decks look very similar. You can see some of the different comparison cards, changing the Brainstormers, which allows you to open up a different slot in the back row. And also allows you a little bit more flexibility in some of the cards you're getting. The combo with Choice standby, being able to look at the top card twice, and if it's character or an event, add to hand, allows you to potentially plus very significantly. As well as looking at the other option for level 2, for the 2/2s, the Kurumi under the Choice standby, which same power level as the 2/2 Toka, but this one has Encore. The 8 standby builds also tend to run a mixture of these 2 cards, kind of splitting whether it's 3/1, 2/2. There's definitely much more of a split of this, because some of these are very situational and very useful as tech options, depending on what you're facing. I bring this one up because of the potential that English has to incorporate a ban list with this set. The concern exists that a ban list may occur. So I wanted to look at the cards that JP put on a ban list to recognize, hey, what's going on here, and what could that look like for English? If this was to happen in English, should choose one of 3. Worth noting that all 3 are in the deck that we're looking at today. Of these 3, Japan has tended to go along with the Kurumi 3/2 to be the one that you keep in your deck, and the others you replaced with other effects. Data Live has a lot of options within the set that allow for some of these cards to be interchanged with other effects that can help match up and line up to some of these things. As we begin to look at alternatives, some of the options here are cards that have been teched in, or cards that could be teched in, that allow for some flexibility within the set, as well as some other utility that can be very useful. With looking at, especially with green, because the deck that I put out doesn't have a lot of green in it, being able to tech in some more green, especially to get this Neg Soul event, prevent your opponent from closing out the game, is very helpful for sure. And there are a couple green tech pieces like this level 0 Clock Bomb that you can run to stock when your opponent plays a climax. There's some interesting tech pieces that kind of help allow for some of that green fix. So these are cards that you should also be aware of when looking at Data Live or trying to build Data Live. Some of the other things included here, the green anti-change counter that is able to remove early plays. A great tool to play against other standby decks, or even in a mirror match. Other cards like the Clean Cut allow you to help salvage resources, especially early. This level 0 Toka that you can pay 3, discard a card, rest itself to search for 2 cards. There's a really interesting card that has been teched in with a choice deck to try to help loop that level 1 combo to continue to get the resources that you're looking for. The blue Toka, the Climax Ditch Salvage, and it can also on cancel run to stock, trying to help get some of that stock early, as well as Climax ditching out for characters. Interesting cards, as well as the field swapping anti-change bomb. This has been a really interesting replacement for the 1-0, so you try to help win some advantage in those situations. That helps save your standby targets and remove your opponent's standby targets. But that's within Data Live. Data Live has some support already existing within English from Fujumi, Fantasia, Bunko. Now, most of these cards are not cards you would intentionally tech in because Data Live has such a powerful set. However, you can. And because you can, somebody will have tried it somewhere. Some things you could see are, like, for example, the Obero combo. It is poorly traded for the set, and so it doesn't make a lot of sense to run it. But if you really like Obero, congratulations, you have an Obero. Bounces to hand when your opponent attacks, potentially loopable. It exists. On the other side of the coin, you have the trait counter that removes a trait from field, which is a really interesting kind of counter, because realistically, this counter allows you to mess with some decks very, very effectively, and other decks doesn't affect at all. For example, looking at Finn the Human and Jake the Dog from Adventure Time, you have to have all of your characters being traded for your endgame combo to play out. Removing the trait, all of a sudden, congratulations, you're now swinging with vanillas. In that kind of situation, that would be very effective, being able to deny your opponent's climax combo. However, on the flip side of that coin, looking at, for example, Data Live itself, it doesn't deny itself. Having one of those teched in there as an event is at least interesting. Whether or not it sees play is a different story. Other options that could be in there, we have the runner, the origami runner, we have the origami and Kermi restander, it's a pretty expensive restander, so whether or not you would see that is questionable, but it does also heal on play. We also have this other potential endgame, which is essentially an Icy Tail, or technically also potentially a salvage, depending on where your clock is at. More than likely, you're going for the Icy Tail, so potentially a 3-lane Icy Tail, but you already have a really powerful Icy Tail already. This one would be costless as a part of the combo, as opposed to the pay 3. And it also spawns itself, so you could spawn out the Icy Tails relatively effectively. It spawns itself from deck. It's at least an interesting card that could see some play. Very unlikely, but these are at least cards that trait with Data Live and its current renditions. Diva of Temptation Miku, I think, is a really interesting card here, because it has a lot of utility in it and of itself. Whether or not it's compatible with current Data Live builds is a little more interesting, especially because it doesn't seem to jive very well with what a lot of the effects that you're trying to do, especially innate standby. This card itself, whether to give power to another celestial spirit, whether to discard a card, rest, to remove a card from center stage to bottom of deck, that's a cost 0. So another way to deny the Obero combo, as well as a pay 2 rest to heal. For me, the most interesting effect there is the pay 2 heal, giving you a stock out to be able to heal yourself, especially in the mid game. Namely because those 2/2s that you're bringing onto field through standby aren't going to be healing. Anything you bring into standby early isn't going to be healing. So there's a lot of potential to lose out on some of those healings because you're paying for free. So having an opportunity to help heal down in the midst of your deck is a really interesting concept. Whether or not you actually have the deck slots available for it becomes a different story. As we're kind of recapping here, as we look as an objective, level 0, get your level 1 standby targets in place. Start pulling those 1/1s into field. Level 1, playing that back row Toka to help get those cross-turn benefits. Level 2, hold the high ground with the board. Start bringing in some of those other pieces to then finish out the game. Begin to grab the pieces that are going to best help close that game out. Depending on what you're going to face, depends on what you grab. This deck itself really benefits
players that know what they're facing and can recognize and identify what they're playing into. Because of the number of choices within the deck, each choice makes a difference each stage of the game. Your early choices affect your mid-game choices, which affect your end-game choices. It allows you to high roll very effectively, just based off the number of choices. You can begin to see the skill level difference between intro players and high-level players through playing this deck, especially if we see a lot of this deck being played throughout English Weiss, which we have the potential of doing, since I believe we are already sold out essentially. When you reach level 3, it's when you turn to your opponent and say, good game, and close it out from there. As we look at a competitive level, Data Live is going to be highly competitive in English Weiss. You have many opportunities to get cards into field, to deny cross-turn effects as well as affect your opponent's field state, as well as controlling your deck state, as well as controlling their deck state. So you have all of these tools readily available to you throughout various points of the game, especially at the end game. This set will see high competitive play. With that in mind, I am certain that, because Day Live was so heavily invested, you're going to be seeing this. You're going to be seeing a lot of this. And because of that, it's going to affect how you play the game. Realistically, I think this is a meta warping set that's come out. And this is a variation of what a good number of people are going to be playing. With that in mind, the overall consistency of this deck, though, I think is going to allow it to survive quite easily Swiss rounds, to be able to then make it to top cut and top cut close out your opponents very quickly and easily. So looking forward to seeing this set compete at a high level. So we're going to look at the deck one more time. This is the cards, these are the ratios running in the deck. You have 17 level 0s. You have 10 level 1s, 6 level 2s, and 9 level 3s. So yeah, this is the deck. We're going to be previewing this in gameplay form on Thursday, and then next week we're going to have our clock talk, followed by last 5 cards, 5 minutes, looking at some of the uncommons, commons from the set. They're also interesting, so we're looking forward to that, and until next time, have a good one. We'll see you then.